Did you think your song and dance and your superstition would help you, Eli? I am the third revelation. We're brothers! We're brothers! I'm finished.
Welcome, everyone, back to another edition of Let's Take Five, the podcast where we look at a cinema legend. We discuss the cinema legend, look at their excellence and range. My name is Eric Martindale.
My name is Austin Luker.
And today we are on our penultimate movie of all the movies we've ever done on this podcast. And we're continuing on our Let's Take 10 of Let's Take 5 to sort of wrap this whole thing out. The previous film that we covered was Last Temptation of Christ. We're going to jump from the 80s and we're going to plummet right here, I think in 2000 or 2001, somewhere around there. And we're going to talk about the Royal Tenenbaums. And after the Royal Tenenbaums, we will wrap this whole thing up with There Will Be Blood. So these final 10 movies are about picking the 10 movies that we didn't get to cover on previous episodes. So you're not going to find them if you go through the backlog. But we're going to discuss these now because we didn't feel like we could wrap up a film podcast without discussing these films. Royal Tenenbaums is the what year, Austin?
I think 2001.
Yeah, I think it's 2001. The 2001 movie featuring Gene Hackman as the lead and the titular Royal Tenenbaum. It's a Wes Anderson film. It was the film of his films for me that put him on the map. And of course, he had Rushmore before this. He had Bottle Rocket before that. But it's this very sort of quirky, weird movie that you would expect Wes Anderson to be, with a very, very dry sense of humor and hilarity, which if you on that top layer and if you dig a little deeper, it is a deeply troubling story about a father who abandoned his family to ruin, essentially, and how the family is come back together under this sort of lie that he has put together. But the ultimate greater good is served. The family is brought back together. But we experience all the lives of the Tenenbaum family. We see Etheline, the mother. We see the children, played by Ben Stiller, Luke Wilson, and Gwyneth Paltrow, and how they used to be geniuses. They used to flourish with all their money and their prestige, and then they all sort of came to ruin and with their different pasts and don't really have much of a relationship with each other anymore. I often refer to this movie as both hilarious and heartbreaking. Each time I see the film, I think it is more of a drama than a comedy, and that actually carried through to this time. And I think the movie actually works better as a drama than it does as a comedy. Anyway, what do you think about this film, Austin?
I really like it. It is one that had been a couple years since I've seen this one. And it's funny because I think I actually found it to be a bit more of a comedy this time. And that's not a negative thing because...
Oh, wait, we disagree?
Yeah.
Shocking.
I know. Well, there's something about, like, I think because the premise to me, like, initially was such, like, an upsetting thing about just, like, how miserable these people are, especially to have someone like Ben Stiller in this role, because even at this time, even though in the 90s and such, he was doing a lot more independent films than you typically think of, like, the Ben Stiller, Zoolander kind of person, I don't think he smiles the entire movie. It was always the thing of, like, always seeing the heartache, because it's so much more on the surface than any other Wes Anderson film. And this time, like, the heartache never ever goes away, but I just kind of recognize, I think, just more of how many funny lines and moments there are. It's also just something that's a bit about our friendship is, like, I realized how many lines that you just use from this movie to incorporate in the middle of our conversations all the time.
All the time. I mean, as far as as any film, I don't think this film has had more of a cultural impact on myself than any other film that, or has had the most of any film that I've ever seen. I quote lines from this film all the time in everyday conversation that aren't even like big lines from the movie. Just like little lines here and there.
And that was the deja vu for me because, you do that for a bunch of movies. Batman and Ghostbusters, but I know those movies. So I know when you're doing them. This first time probably seeing it in, like, I don't know, 5 years or so, was like, oh, right. This movie is so much related to, like, Eric.
Well, was there a line specifically you can think of?
I should have wrote them down.
You should have wrote them down. As they came to you, they should have. Well, the thing about the movie is like its thesis, it wears sort of on the sleeve, is this sort of, and it's not a story that's, wholly like unfamiliar to people. I mean, you have the guy who was a bad person and tried to make up for the bad things he did. But the sort of difference here is that the character doing these things doesn't realize that's what the thesis is until after he's already doing them, which adds a different nugget to that. And by which I mean the intent of the guy to sort of have a redemption arc was never the person's attempt at all. They didn't mean for it to be redemptive. They just found out that it was redemptive. This idea of Royal Tenenbaum, he's broke and he's broke, one, and two, his ex-wife is about to get with another man for the first time in 30 years, and he has to figure out a way to stop that. And in doing so, he has to reconnect with the family. So he fakes a terminal cancer diagnosis in order to get reacclimated with everybody. And it's not until they find out that his cancer diagnosis is bullshit and throw him back out onto the street that he realizes, this has been the happiest time of my life.
Yeah, and I like that the film kind of begins with a very long, introduction of everybody, which is actually very, very, very good. Typically, when you kind of, over-introduce characters, it's easy to kind of get lost in them, but this was such a clear, precise of who they all are. But by doing that, it gives you an automatic distrust and disdain towards Royal Tenenbaum. So when you're getting to see these characters interact with them again, you feel that legacy, but you also just kind of feel them, in a way, having to confront those feelings for the first time in a long time. And it just immediately becomes a movie where every moment seems to matter a lot more. Because someone, again, like Ben Stiller's character, is just so... He's not a very emotionally articulate character, but he's recognizing that something is powerfully bubbling up within him.
Why is he not emotionally mature? Why is he not able to have these conversations? Is because his dad effectively neutered him.
Yeah,
I mean the thing about Ben Stiller in this movie, and this is my favorite. Actually, this film holds three actors' favorite performance of mine. And one of them is Ben Stiller's. I think this is his best performance, partly because, he doesn't smile, so it's a different challenge for him than that. And it's not a gimmick either, because it's like you said, this is prior. I mean, he was doing more independent stuff, but this isn't like Ben Stiller making a serious movie now. Mm-hmm. This isn't like Jim Carrey doing The Truman Show or The Majestic after he'd done years of comedy. This is sort of in the middle of that, or at the beginning of that sort of rise. And he's very, very serious, and he's very, he's damaged because of two things. One, he's damaged because of what his father did to him when he was a kid, or the lack thereof. And then two, his wife was just killed, just died in a car accident. So he's recently widowed, and he's damaged, and he has problems, and he needs his family, he needs his dad, and he has no way of emoting that. And then you have, Margo, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, another, what I think is her best performance as well. She's actually my favorite character in the movie. Mm-hmm. She is completely isolated from her family because she was adopted, which would have been fine if her father didn't keep reminding her that she was adopted all the time. Mm-hmm. And she is completely isolated. I mean, it shows this might be my favorite production design in a movie ever. I mean, you'll notice the little difference. Like, her door has 17 locks on it, and she's very, very secretive. And then which comes to a head later in the film. So you have all this stuff. These different personality quirks from each of these characters, but all sort of arise at the same point, which is that their father did a lot of damage to them. And the movie shows you what he does to them. Shooting Chaz with a BB gun, even though they're on the same team, telling Margo, "This is my adopted daughter, Margo Tenenbaum," when introducing her at parties. And those scenes are funny. Mm-hmm. And they were funny to Royal, too. But then it's like you laugh at it, but then you pay for the laughs because you see what it's done to them as adults.
It's funny. I've owned this DVD, forever kind of thing, and I only just kind of now realized sitting down here It's just kind of this nice DVD cover that has all the cast like looking forward as if it was like a formal photograph and whatnot, but only Royal is smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's smirking. Everyone else just like looks so stoic isn't the right word, just upset in different kinds of like respectable ways. It did make me think of a couple of lines you say. One was, I think, again, a really funny moment, but really upsetting, is when he is playing BB guns with
He's shooting BB guns,
yeah,
with Chaz and the kids.
It's just the great imagery of Gene Hackman just appearing over the roof and shooting his son, and the son going, "We're on the same team." And he goes, "There are no teams," and then he just kind of ducks back down over the roof.
Yeah, laughing. After he shoots his son with the BB gun, and then later this is played to great effect because we go. There's three parts that always stick out in this movie, and maybe I'll get to the other ones later. But you go to the grave site of Royal's mom, and then you go to another grave, which is of the wife of Ben Stiller, or would have been. She's passed away, and then they go to that grave. And he goes, "Hey, Jesse, is that BB still lodged in your finger?" And he shows it to him, and he said, "Why did you shoot me?" Mm-hmm. He looks up to him. It's this very serious moment. He looks at him, and he has this because for Chaz, that was a throw off thing, that Royal did. And he said, "Well, it was the object of the game, wasn't it?" And Ben said, "We were on the same team." And then he walks away, and it's that it kind of punishes you for laughing at it earlier. And this is something Royal probably hasn't thought about. He thought it was funny, and then Ben Stiller's bringing this up. Chaz is bringing this up at the graveside of his wife, and this had a profound effect on him that day. He knew from that day he could never trust his father, that they were not on the same team.
And he has a physical memory of that as well.
And he has a physical reminder of that because the BB is still lodged in his fingers, which is Wes Anderson goofy and funny, but it gets back to what I'm saying, hilarious and yet heartbreaking. Like that's a problem. It means something.
And it goes to also mean just another kind of, because this movie, I hate to kind of use the overused word for Wes Anderson, this is way quirkier than his previous two films. It kind of gets to be even more of the dollhouse aesthetics and structure of Wes Anderson. We're going to know more as throughout the years, but it's way also more emotionally vulnerable than his previous two films. But like I remember like also when like he asks about like, do you sell the BB gun? Ben Stiller's character doesn't look away from the grave. He just lifts his hand towards his dad for him to look himself. Mm-hmm. He wasn't bothered to looking his dad in the face about that. And yeah, there is just, Gene Hackman in this movie is outstanding, because I know we always talked about doing a Wes Anderson 5.
He's my third. This is my favorite Gene Hackman performance, and that's obviously saying a lot.
Yeah, no. I was watching this film going, obviously we always talked about doing a Wes Anderson 5, but I kept watching like, man, a Gene Hackman 5 would have been amazing, because like this guy, to have this kind of performance written for him, and to be just it recognizes the natural charisma of Gene Hackman, but also looks at the gruffer elements of him that makes him kind of such a unique actor throughout the decades. Something like someone who has like a lot of charisma at the same age, someone like Robert Redford couldn't do this, because you need someone who is dirtier. He's done something wrong with his family, and it's just this level of neglect. And to have the characters confront him and to kind of put him in a position where he kind of stops laughing is, really amazing. A scene I thought was so good on this viewing was when he's talking to his adopted daughter, Margo, mm-hmm. and she challenged them to even know my middle name.
Oh my God, that's my second. So I said I had 3 scenes. This is one of the 3. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
It's such an amazing moment, because he's being confronted, and there is this kind of moment where like it's very quiet, but he kind of like catches his breath for a second, realizing that he does not initially know the answer, and attempts to hope that he can get out of it, saying it's a trick question. You don't have a middle name. And before he even finishes the last word, she very quietly says, "Helen," and he gets an incredibly emotional moment where he says, that was my mother's name. And she goes, I know.
Immediately, she knows what his mother's name was, and she knows, because she knows too, that how much his mother meant to him, which is, but then he doesn't know his own daughter's middle name, which was his mother's name. It's crazy, because that's probably why she has the name.
Yes, 100%.
So, like, how could that be? How could he forget what her namesake was? And, you know, this is a particularly heartbreaking moment, too, I think, because Royal has passed. We now, as an audience member, know Royal wants to be better. The family will distrust him, but we've reached a point as the viewer to know that Royal is trying to improve as best that Royal can, which is not great. For him, it was always about broad gestures, like, what can I do? What grand act can I do to sort of save my family, once he realized that, you know, he may have been responsible for a lot of this, or not save them, but get them to love him. And this first thing he thinks, well, I'm going to lie about a terminal cancer diagnosis, then they'll be forced to do it. And what he finds out at the end of the film is it's small acts of kindness. Getting the divorce papers for Ethylene, and just a very small thing. I got you a divorce, which is, you know, what she wanted and needed. Or giving the dog, Ben Stiller and Chaz, their dog gets run over, and he gives them a new dog. And that's the first time Chaz cracks right there. It's been a rough year, Dad. And he says, I know you. Or I had a rough year, Dad. I know you have, Chazzy. And it's just like the first father-son moment, of genuine father-son moment in the entire film. And it's beautiful. I mean, that's the other one that's my favorite of those three.
Well, I mean, looking at that idea of how these characters respond to actions, I mean, the central premise is such a great one, that his three kids are geniuses in their own field. And so it is this thing of, like, no matter how good they were at their field or how they became their best selves, it never got his approval in the same way. Right. And there is that kind of tragedy of, like, oh, if only I was, you know, if I made this kind of hit thing, then, like, he would love me. And it just never ever happened, even though that they are considered to be geniuses. There's so much of geniuses that other people are profiting off their career by knowing them. The Owen Wilson character.
Yeah, exactly. He always wanted to be a Tenenbaum. Eli Cash.
Yeah, who co-wrote the movie. And yeah, there is this kind of, and it's not even a movie is saying that they're geniuses because he was neglectful. They're almost separate ideas, and even a sadder idea is that they were geniuses and he never appreciated them. And it's just a really kind of beautiful thing. I thought of another line you say a lot. And if there's ever, like, a movie or show you don't like, you quote when he is talking to young Margo about her school play, and she, like, says, like, what about the characters? He goes, characters? What characters? They're just on stage in animal costumes.
Yeah, they're just a bunch of kids in animal costumes. It didn't seem believable to me. It's like, that's it. And this kid puts on this play and he rubs their face. And then you have the other brother, Richie Tenenbaum, who's he was the one that got most of the love from the dad. But he has a different sort of trauma, which is that he's in love with his adopted sister. Right. And then that's sort of its own subplot that leads to, a suicide attempt. It's really messed up. I mean, it's really, really well done, and it's a really, really serious moment. Again, we're talking about a comedy. Right.
That is a scene where
it's very violent.
I don't know if Wes Anderson has ever challenged himself more, because it's something that you have to get just right. And not be lied about. And it's stunning. Just the way they filmed it and the way Luke Wilson performs it.
I guess fourth other best performance, but just because I've never seen Luke Wilson in anything else. Maybe like one or two films here and there.
Yeah, it's not hard for this to be the best Luke Wilson performance. Let's be honest.
It's too easy a pickings. But he is great in it. I mean, he really is great, and that suicide scene he really sells Fun, not fun. That's bad.
No, I understand.
Fact, not fun fact, just fact. Little trivia. So the song that plays during this is "Needle in the Hay" by Elliott Smith. Elliott Smith would 2 years later kill himself. And the song is the reason why the song, it's not just like, oh, it's in the back. Like, the song is the scene. It's like a music video with the song playing, essentially, which is a suicide attempt. And this was actually done. It would almost be too on the nose if it were the other way around. Elliott Smith kills himself. He does a song. It's in a scene with a suicide attempt, but actually came after. And the song, and the other reason to bring him up is just because Elliott Smith just won an Academy Award in 1997 for his original song in Good Will Hunting. But anyway, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. There's so many characters, so many great sort of side things happening. You know, Bill Murray's great in this film. Dudley's fantastic. Actually, I like Danny Glover a lot in this film. Great.
Well,
good stuff.
I wanted to kind of go off the Elliott Smith thing because this is such a iconic soundtrack as well.
Oh my God, it's amazing! It's amazing.
I mean, Wes Anderson's always used music so well. You can kind of see that throughout the British pop, throughout Rushmore and such like that. This has just so many great songs. A lot of them are really well known. I mean, it begins with "Hey Jude," right? But never seen "Hey Jude" used in this kind of way of watching his kids like rise to success, but all in a very bittersweet element while the song is kind of going on around that. You have the Nico songs are utterly perfectly used, and this amazing score by what's his name, Mark
Mothersbaugh.
It's funny, just turning on the movie and having the menu play for a half second, the first few chords.
I heard that. And I heard that song on an Ancestry.com commercial about a year ago.
Really?
Yeah, I was like, wow, that's great.
See, it is in every episode of Film Spotting, the wonderful film podcast where we have the co-host on a handful of episodes back. So that is so ingrained to me from that, because I've heard 700 episodes of that show, that it throws me off. And yeah, I mean, it's
a great one in the cemetery. That's a great one too. That one's really good. And it ends. I own the soundtrack, and it's always funny when you buy a soundtrack, but one of the songs that you really loved is not on the soundtrack for some reason. There's a Van Morrison song that plays at the end of the film, which is something I want to talk about. But Van Morrison song that plays, it's not on the soundtrack. So I don't know why that didn't happen. Yeah, I don't know.
Rights issue.
It had to have been a rights issue. So the film sort of wraps up in this. At the end of the film, Etheline, the ex-wife, marries someone else, and everything's kind of wrapped up in a bow. And then you get a thing that says epilogue. And by the way, there are chapter breaks in the film that quite literally say chapter 1, chapter 2. It's like a book called The Royal Tenenbaums. So then you get to the epilogue, and then the epilogue, Royal has a heart attack. And Chaz is in the ambulance with him and is the only witness to his father's death, which I think is like so perfect. And it had to have happened soon after the wedding in the film. And the reason why is because the same priest is doing the ceremony and his leg hasn't mended from something that happened there. And you have everybody standing by the gravesite, and they all walk out one by one when this beautiful Van Morrison song plays, and Royal's there, and his epitaph says that he rescued his family from a fire and then just drowned in the Caspian Sea. Well, there's a joke earlier in the film that he wishes he had an awesome grave, and he tells Ethel that he had a certain epitaph that he wanted. And this is obviously not true. He died of a heart attack, but he has this in here. But it's symbolism too, because he did save his family.
Yeah,
and it was burning down. His family was a total dumpster fire before he came back. Now he was the one that lit the match.
Yes,
which is important to remember as well. But he did. He brought them all back together and saved them at the end. So that thesis sort of, it is a happy ending. It's a bittersweet, but it's a happy ending because Royal mattered. In the end, he mattered. They needed him. They needed their father, and he was there when they needed him the most, and saved them. So it's a cool story in that way. It is quite literally about a man who is a shit his whole life and then tries to repair that damage at the end, which is a line he says. He says, "Can't someone be a shit their whole life and then try to do better?" I think people want to hear that.
Well, I mean, the screenplay is just so tightly structured as well as being so character based, because when they do find out that he has kind of faked the cancer, they're all upset. But he goes, "Well, I do have high blood cholesterol."
Yeah.
Which is ultimately how he dies.
Yeah. He says, "I do have high blood pressure." That's
when kind of looking back at Royal, looking at his own legacy, I was thinking about another kind of great moment near the end of the movie where he is at a play of Margo's, a play that kind of rarely, it didn't get the reviews the other ones did, but it is so clearly personal to her. A person who almost never shows any sort of about herself, and you have a play that is very clearly about her father because you see the exact shot recreated by the other actors, and everyone in the theater is either not liking it or just like a bit confused. And you see Ben Stiller like very anxious. He's like gripping his playbill, but behind him you have Gene Hackman who's laughing.
Yep.
And I like to think that for the first time, he got what Margo was going for in a way that nobody else did. Like, I have to imagine that Margo wanted that to be funny, but only her father got it. I think her father got it because he's aware that that version of him is a shit, but also he's a vain asshole who enjoys that fact that he's on stage.
Right. I mean, because it is what you're seeing on stage is him. It's him.
Yeah. 100%.
You know, a version of him, and he actually says a line that he says earlier in the film. But yeah, I love. And Margo is so good. Gwyneth Paltrow in this movie, they look at the way she's blocked in every scene. Like, she is always in the background. Everyone is always in the foreground, and she is always way away in the background. And this intentional sort of isolation that they present for her in this film, and it's just great. Like, in a lot of ways, I almost. She doesn't quite steal the show because Royal Tenenbaum is Royal Tenenbaum, and he's just incredible. But God, I love Gwyneth Paltrow in this movie, and I've never said that about anything else. So, but she is so necessary to this movie. Can't overemphasize it.
Yeah, goop aside, I think Gwyneth Paltrow is kind of. We always forget that she's good. Rewatching the Marvel films, the first Iron Man, like. This movie would be way worse if she wasn't as fun as she was. I don't even think about her as a fun actress or think of her as someone who could pull off this. And it's funny because she looks like herself, but her eyeshadow is so heavy that she looks like a different actress. And it's just like one makeup choice. Sorry. Well, yeah, like I said, she kind of goes to the background. I think it's when they're in the hospital. And I remember it was like a very like tightly shot room, and you have like 5 characters like so close to the camera, but she is so far back, she's like literally standing in the corner of the room, so she's not even like in the typical like Wes Anderson blocking of kind of everyone at their exact positions. She's in a diagonal, like leaning against 2 different walls in the corner.
Yeah, that happens. It happens later in the film, or earlier in the film too. Whenever Royal is being pushed out of the house once they find the cancer diagnosis is fake, there's a stairwell that's 2 sets of stairs, one going up, and it turns to go further up to connect. And she is at the second basin, the middle basin, while everyone else is on the top floor. And yeah, it's great. I mean, and that isn't it, but it ties into sort of production side and the general aesthetic of the film, which is just absolutely incredible. I mean, which is something you expect from a Wes Anderson film anyway. But I think none more so than this film are achieved so well than in this film. I mean, and to see Life Aquatic, I love Life Aquatic. We've done Life Aquatic on this show. I think Life Aquatic, as I've always said, I think it's the worst great movie ever made. But it almost is too in love with the production design. It almost becomes about that in some respects.
Oh yeah.
Where this film it's still the movie. It's still the story is the most important thing. He doesn't really. I love Wes Anderson. I do. I'm a huge fan of Wes Anderson, but I don't think he quite sort of achieves that balance between aesthetic and story again until Grand Budapest. So
yeah, I think that like because, Bottle Rocket will always be his weirdest film because it's not in there, because it's a super low-budget movie. Mm-hmm. And with this and Rushmore, he kind of gets that blend. He gets to finally have the budget to be able to do these shots and be able to make these sets kind of the way he does. With Life Aquatic, and especially Darjeeling Unlimited, he gets a bit up his own two ass about it. Like, he almost has too much money to do it. But I think recently, now he kind of I feel like he had a re-examination, and he can now use that style to tell different kind of stories that are still emotional, like Moonrise Kingdom.
Yeah. Moonrise Kingdom, starting with it, yeah.
Best. Even Fantastic Mr. Fox, a movie that feels like the most accurate Roald Dahl adaptation. I love that author growing up, and yet is also undeniably a Wes Anderson movie. It's cool that he ever letting you forget the Wes Anderson film, he's blending the styles more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he stops, because you see, which is a good thing. This is the type of thing that you get worried about a director that shows promise early doing stuff the sort of the way he does and becoming so within their own world and within their own aesthetic. It's one thing to have all the Wes Anderson movies and catalog on the wall and say, if I'm in for that type of experience, this is what I want. But the fear is that they end up being Tim Burton.
Yeah.
And they end up getting crushed under the weight of their own reputation of weirdness, I guess. Or I guess uniqueness is probably more correct. We're talking, Tim Burton. Some people think Big Picture is a good movie, but without engaging in a real debate, this is a director that hasn't made a good movie in 30 years, and you don't really have Wes Anderson. You'd be worried about that type of thing, but it seems like he. And that really, Life Aquatic was good. Darjeeling, not so much, but it looks like he was able to shift out of it post that. He learned something from that film. I'm not a huge fan of Darjeeling. I don't think it's bad. I probably should see it again just because most Wes Anderson movies get better for me on a first viewing. Royal Tenenbaums I thought was fine the first time I saw it, and here we are 20 viewings later, and now I think it's one of the finest films ever made. So that's, quite a marked improvement.
This is my third, maybe fourth time watching it, and I like it better each time. It's just an incredible blending of style and character study, and also it's really funny. It's really, really funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, I think that wraps up this discussion of the Royal Tenenbaums. We'll be back next week with our final film review, where we'll be discussing the excellent film There Will Be Blood.
That's an understatement.
It's an understatement. Yeah, it's very, very good.
It's quite excellent. Yes.
Big fan. So you can hear that discussion next week on the podcast. Until then, you can look back at our entire library of episodes over at theartofmore.com. Leave a comment there if you want to start any sort of discussion about the movies and things we talked about. Also, while you're there, check out podcasts like The Immortals and Ad Absurdum. Leave us a review on iTunes. Why not? We got 2 episodes left after this. We appreciate it. Still, people can find our shows in the whole library. Where can we find you, Eric?
Constant Diversions, my YouTube channel. You can check me out on there.
How is the Crown Trigger video?
Dude, I think the cop podcast is going to beat it. After all this time. I swear it will be made. Just who knows when.
So no matter what, subscribe to that channel to get that. I'm really excited to watch it.
Exactly.
So anyway, we'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Austin Ligger.
I'm Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Baby!
You still got that little BB in your hands, has he?
Why'd you shoot me?
It's the object of the game, wasn't it?
No. We were on the same team.
Were we? Well, you sued me twice. Got me disbarred. I don't hold it against you, do I? You think you could start forgiving me?
Why should I?
Because you're hurting me.
Come on.